evening, everyone. My name is Daphne Rabinovich, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the 2022 Giller Book Club. This is our 9th book club this year, and we have 2 more, so be sure you sign up for those as well. Please make sure to have your Zoom on a side-by-side view for the best possible viewing experience. Tonight, it is my profound pleasure to introduce you to our interviewer, Jill Adamson. Jill Adamson is the critically acclaimed author of The Outlander, which won so many prizes, I can't tell you. It won the Dashiell Hammett Prize for Literary Excellence in Crime Writing, the Amazon.ca First Novel Award, the Relit Award, and the Drummer General's Award. And it was also a finalist for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the CBC Canada Reads, and the Prix Femina in France. It was longlisted for the International Impact Dublin Literary Award and chosen as a Globe and Mail and Washington Post Top 100 book. Her book, RIDGERUNNER, followed that one, and it was shortlisted for the 2020 Scotiabank Giller Prize. She's also the author of a collection of linked stories, Help Me, Jacques Cousteau, and 2 poetry collections, Privilev and Ashland. She lives here in Toronto. Tonight, Jill will be interviewing Linda Ray Feng, who is the author of the novel Swimming Back to Trout River, which was longlisted for the 2021 Scotiabank Giller Prize. Please feel free to submit your questions at the bottom of your screen using the Q&A button, and I'm going to hand it over now to these 2 amazing women.
Thank you so much, Daphne. Thanks for that introduction, and thank you to the Giller Book Club for pairing me with Linda Ray Feng and her wonderful book, Swimming Back to Trout River. I'm very happy to be here, a little bit nervous, as you know, people always get when they're doing these things. But I thought, we could have Linda and I could probably have many different kinds of discussions, considering that we're both writers. And if this was a room full of other writers or writing students, we would probably cover certain things, and we will do that anyway, because we're both writers. We'll talk about writing and the choices that writers make. But because this is a book club, I thought, I would spend a little extra time talking about my experience as a reader encountering this book. And I'll introduce Linda literally the way you would introduce yourself to her book if you were in a bookstore or you were at a book club and somebody said, here, you'd really love this book. So I'm going to read her biography, and it's pretty amazing but quite succinctly written. So first, this is Linda Ray Feng. Born in Shanghai, Linda Ray Feng has lived in San Francisco, New York, and Toronto. She is a graduate of Harvard and Columbia and is currently a professor of Chinese cultural history at the University of Toronto. She has been twice awarded a MacDowell Fellowship for her fiction, and her prose and poetry have appeared in publications such as The Fiddlehead, Kenyon Review, Santa Monica Review, and the Washington Square Review. Swimming Back to Trout River is her first novel. And I can tell you that as a debut, it's a pretty stunning debut. So I'll read you what you would read on the inside of the jacket. And this will be a discussion for later, because some jacket descriptions really do sum the book up. It'd be very difficult with this book to do it. So I'll read it and then we'll discuss, how much kind of bigger the book is than the jacket description, and why it was kind of necessary to keep it to this. Can one family with an ocean between them start anew without losing themselves or each other? In the summer of 1986, in a small Chinese village, 10-year-old Junie receives a momentous letter from her parents, who had left for America years ago. Her father promises to return home and collect her by her 12th birthday. But Junie's growing determination to stay rooted in the idyllic countryside with her beloved grandparents threatens to upend her family's shared future. What Junie doesn't know is that her parents, Momo and Cassia, are newly estranged from each other in their adopted country, both holding close private tragedies and histories from the tumultuous years of their youth during China's Cultural Revolution. While Momo grapples anew with his deferred musical ambitions and dreams of Junie's future, Cassia finally begins to wrestle with a shocking act of brutality from her past. And what might this have to do with Dawn, a talented violinist from Momo's past looking for a sea change of her own? To fulfill his promise to Junie, Momo must pounce on one last chance to reunite his family, even if it means bringing painful secrets to light. In Swimming Back to Trout River, Linda Ray Feng elegantly weaves together four entangled stories, each with its own heartbreak and resilience, while tenderly revealing the hopes, compromises, and abiding ingenuity that make up the lives of immigrants. So that sounds, intense enough. But the real thing for me in approaching this book was how to talk about it's hard to describe the book because any description seems to sort of reduce it to a simple or little simpler story, when in fact it seems to be a moving and quite intuitive meditation on human connection. And there are all these moments in the book that are about what it's like to be alive, and not just particularly in that moment in the Cultural Revolution or in the, that particular time period. But also there are multiple surprises in the narrative. And so anyone who's writing jacket copy has to be very, very careful not to spoiler. And I have to be careful not to spoiler because there are so many times in the book when I went, oh, now what's going to happen now? So I will ask Linda, I'll sort of open with a very kind of dumb question, but like a broad strokes question, and we can get to other questions more specific in a minute. But why that time setting? Why those decades? What was it about that period of time in China and in the rest of the world that fascinated you and made you think, you know what, I think I want to write a novel about that?
Thank you so much, Jill. First of all, thank you for reading the the jacket blurb, and you do it so well, and thank you for describing some of these what's unsaid in the jacket copy. And I love what you said about being alive, because that's actually one of the wonderful things about reading books and certainly about writing them, is to try to capture that feeling of being alive in so many different forms. But why that setting? Why those decades? That's a great question too. I actually do a lot of research on 9th century, like ancient China, and people sometimes say, oh, this is an incredible time, you should write a historical novel based on in 9th century China. And for whatever reason, that hasn't really captured my imagination. The Cultural Revolution is something that most of us, for anyone who is alive, who has been alive before me, they would have experienced it to some extent, at whatever age they might be. And so really, if I wanted to write about any experience that predated me in any way, well, I mean, if it's not in the 9th century, then I will, it's a part of history and it's part of the world that cannot be avoided. And because I didn't personally experience those decades myself, and I'm always drawn to things that I don't understand, or things that I think I'll never fully understand. it sort of it's always beckoned to me as this kind of lighthouse of unknown across some kind of vast shore of unknowability. And just, and because I'm stubborn, I always want to row toward that lighthouse. And so all those reasons, want me to, I just, that's probably the most important reason that I kept grappling with it, and collecting anecdotes from people reading about it, and just trying to get inside that one decade as much as possible. And then also to try to understand its aftermath, its psychological aftermath, which is still felt today. I think, unless you're born in the 2000s, there's some kind of aftermath, repercussion from those decades that will touch people, and touch families, and influence how people interact with each other, and how much people trust each other. And
That's
and
interesting.
I think it's extremely profound and wide-ranging. So that's a long answer to your question.
It's a really good answer. And what amazes me, because you're talking about research and you're talking about paddling towards something, being fascinated by something that you don't understand, and needing to understand it from the reader's point of view, or from the reader's experience reading this book. The way you talk about the historical realities is so intelligent, because it's all coming out of the experience of the characters. The characters are living in their lives, and they're in the middle of this huge revolution and complete cultural sea change that is violent and is intense. And and all of your characters are artistic, they're musical, and we'll get to talking about that in a minute, about music. I almost want to skip down 5 questions to sort of get to that immediately, because you write so well about these difficult things and these difficult moments in time by having your characters live it. And so, I remember when they paired me with you as an interviewer, I was like, am I really, the right person to interview about this? I studied the Cultural Revolution in university, but that and 50 cents buys you a coffee. What if, there are important things that I'm missing because I'm just, ignorant of the facts, or of the, the sort of the trajectory of what happened during that decade and the decades that followed. But there was no problem. I mean, if there are any readers out there who are thinking maybe I won't understand it because I don't understand history, this is not the case. The author has done an incredible job of, it's not even a job, it's just a very brilliant way of making you experience what's happening. And so there will be these huge differences between how Momo feels about the Cultural Revolution, because he's this euphoric part of it. It's part of his new, bursting out as a person. And how Dawn feels about it, because she's so deeply musical, and such a little tiger, like such a fighter. And there, the ways all the different characters deal with this, the monster in the room, I thought it was really brilliant. So if you felt like you didn't really know what you're doing, you did a great job, research. Do you feel at some level that you are good at research?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jill. That's so flattering, coming from someone who does so well in what you do. I don't know if research is something that one is ever good at. I think, I do, and I obviously have some professional training in different kinds of research, in more sort of older material. But I think with every book, and you probably know this very well, and I'm telling you things that you already know, but every book demands its own form of research, and it demands its own solution, and it demands its own form of storytelling. And I think this is the reason that the second and third books, people tell me anyways, that the second, third books aren't any easier to write than the first. And so and one thing that I really admire about about RIDGERUNNER, which I'm reading, is that you made life so tangible and so deeply palpable, and no doubt from research and any combinations of research. And so one thing I wanted to do in my own writing is to try to convey as much as possible, what it's like to walk into a room in 1968. What kind of gifts are given to newlyweds in 1972, and what does a thermos kind of looks like and feels like, and maybe not feels like, but what does it look like? What peculiar materiality of life in those days presented themselves. And that was one thing that I really enjoyed doing. So just to kind of think about what it's like to ride on the train in 1982 and 1981, and how does that differ from being on a train in the 2000s. That always captivated me, and I hope that readers who are thinking about picking up this book will enjoy kind of being immersed in that very tangible material aspects of being alive, as you said, and I could impart a little bit of that to people who were not, who didn't live it, myself included. So
yourself included. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I made notes, about the things that I was so impressed by. You mentioned the thermos, and that the outside of it is insulated with what's left over from the metal when they punch out. This is the kind of thing that makes me crazy. I love it so much. When they punch out what's necessary to make bicycle chains, so there'll be this leftover metal, and why not use it to insulate. And there's the things like when Cassie is giving birth in the hospital, she is referred even to her own husband as, "Are you the husband of patient 17?" And Momo riding his bike, and they've been given the right to marry, and he's aware of the marriage certificate inside a padded envelope.
Yeah.
And things like references to polyester, and because some of the book happens in the United States, the couple from LA that have a Playboy as part of their marital zeitgeist. There's just so many great moments there that popped out at me, and it's just like there are so many delightful uses of research that I learned a lot from you. So
well, thank you. It's for me that that's one of the joys of writing and reading, just those sort of sensory tangible markers of time. And
yes.
I think this is how we think, this is how we remember things, and this is how we become first aware of time's passing and how illogical it is. And I think that somehow those textures of smells, whatever the weird designs, organize our thinking and our experience to time and its vastness and immeasurability. And I think for me anyways, having those things to hang on to is how I can make sense of experience and sort of history on much vaster scales than my own life. And that's why I hold on to them so dearly and kind of revel in them.
Exactly. And for readers, I really think these are the kinds of things that jump out at you, the feeling that you're actually in the room with people, the tactileness of it, the sex, there is sex in the book, and people's feelings while it's happening, and the you there's an amazing, the women in this book are amazing, and each one of them is so very, very different. And you and I have both read books where, you know, characters kind of blur together and you can't remember if it's, you know, this person or that person, and you have to go back and things like that. There's absolutely nothing like that in this book, because the characters, you know, exude this intense personality, and they exude it from the beginning of the scene. You know exactly whether it's Dawn, you know, or Cassie. And there are, how am I going to do this so that's, I won't spoiler, but Cassie as a character is mysterious, because there are things that have happened in her life, that you don't reveal to the reader until a little later. And she's one of the first characters that we meet. She's taking Junie to live with her grandparents. And any reader reading this will be going, and in fact, people on the train are, you know, going, what's going on? They're looking at Junie. And you understand, but you don't understand why she's leaving her child with the grandparents. And oh my God, by the end of the book, it is the details of her life are just so poignant. And again, this research of yours goes so deeply into how people are feeling at any given moment and what emotions do to you. And again, this will lead us into music, because music is, it is in many ways, it's an experience. It is tactile in its own way. And so many of the characters in the book are musical. Again, I'll give you a sort of a wide brush kind of question. And this is sort of soft pedaling a little bit. Why music for you? Why music for repressive regimes? Why is music powerful and dangerous? Why is it something that some people absolutely cannot leave behind? Why?
Well, I'll answer like sort of starting from my own interest, which is that for me, music is also like one of those lighthouses across this wide, endless sea of unknowability, because I'm not a musician. I played the violin briefly in high school, but that's
Very
about
surprised.
that's the extent of
No,
my
you are very,
training.
you seem the way you write, I assumed you were very
Well,
musical.
thank you. But because it's something that maybe that's there's a sort of an iceberg kind of effect here. I know enough about music to know that there is 90% of it underneath the surface of the water, that I will, that it's kind of not so accessible to me, and that I would have to fight very hard to get to know. But I can see the 10% that's above water, and that discrepancy fascinates me. And again, like I said, I'm fascinated and empowered and kind of driven by things that I don't know and I want to know more about. And so, the write what you know adage doesn't quite work for me, because I always I write things that I want to know more of. And so I try very hard to get inside that world, because that's relentlessly drawing me there. And then also, I think, what you said about music and repressive regimes of any kind. I think there's also some ways that music eludes language, which is the kind of my tool and trade and my bread and butter that I do know well. And I feel especially the limits of language when I try to write about music, try to think about, try to read about music, and try, to contain music within words. And I see how incredibly limiting that is. And I see how much more music sort of just defies linguistic representation, in many ways rational representation. And I think that's what's so powerful. And because of that power, it's also dangerous, and therefore it's feared. It's feared by both its practitioners and people who don't want certain things to happen within the population. So I think it constantly has this possibility of spilling out beyond rationality, beyond, our verbal descriptions, and just that in itself is worth kind of, trying to uncover time and again. And I think it also in some ways transcends our normal scheme of remembering things. I think there's a way that music help us remember, and of course we have a experiment, sort of a scientific experiments where Alzheimer's patients respond to music when they have forgotten language, when they have forgotten or have lost most of their sense of self, and yet you play them a song from their childhood and they immediately come back to some kind of recollection that's very strong and very fundamental to themselves. And I love that, and I want to kind of dig at what makes that work. And there's of course I can only try to do that, but it's something that I hope holds the characters together, holds their past, present, and future together. So
I should ask you to read something, but would you mind if I read you something from your book?
Sure, no,
because it's
please.
exactly what you just talked about. I made a bunch of notes here. So this is just a very short thing, but it's Momo and Dawn interacting early on, and he says you were playing this, and he hummed a snatch of a melody that he caught. She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. That's close, but it's more like, and she played the entire phrase to show him. Yes, yes, he said, though he wasn't sure what he was referring to, the correct identity of the phrase recalled, or the fact that she could play this as a way of finishing a sentence, as if she was able to re-enter an elaborate dream from any point at any time. She just sort of, picks up the violin and goes, no, this is what it was. And it's part of her body, and it's part of the way she communicates. And it's just so gorgeously done. And I think later on, I think he and Dawn have a, it's him and Dawn have a sort of a science versus music kind of
yes.
Debate. And they're coming from such different ways of thinking, and yet they're strangely similar. Their passions are strangely similar. So it's funny. My father had a stroke many years ago, and he lost the ability to speak, but he could respond to music. And somebody told me that that's because it's quite mysterious how we store music, and it seems to be all over the brain. It doesn't seem to be in one particular spot, which I found completely fascinating. And so, yeah, you deploy music a lot when you can't communicate with people, and it helps.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful language on its own that, actually to call it language is to reduce it a little bit, but I'll just use that metaphor. But
yeah,
so this is the reason that I had this abiding interest in it, despite my amateur status.
It's interesting you talk about not knowing. So sometimes when I'm writing a book, and the book you're reading right now, there's an awful lot of cold scenes. I would be surprised if any of those were written while it was cold. They were probably written in the heat of summer, and I often feel like the reason that seems to work a little better for me, and I think perhaps for other writers, is that the whole of your imagination has to come to play in order to write the scene. So if you don't know about something and you just go crazy learning about it, the whole of your imagination is being deployed to talk about this, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like I never worked so hard in my life as I tried when I tried to, write those scenes. And it's, I mean, it sounds weird when I say it, but it's as if everything that all of my brain lights up, like not just a certain part that, I have to just like lean on imagining and kind of reasoning and kind of recollecting and synthesizing and all of those skills that every single thing I have to kind of put it into those scenes to make them work. And it actually feels wonderful. I mean,
It does.
it's
It does. Writing
exhausting.
feels, when it's going
but-
well, there's no better feeling. And, sometimes occasionally you bang your head against something, or you, as I say, you paint yourself into a corner and you don't quite know how to get yourself out of it. Sometimes those are I get a little crunchy about those moments. But how long did it take you to write this book?
Well, I mean, from its first draft, its first beginnings to when I found a publisher for it, there was probably 9 years. And it sounds horrible, but of course, I wasn't writing full time in those 9 years. But still, I sometimes think that my spirit animal is probably the sloth, in that I do everything slowly. I read slowly, I learn slowly, and
Do you? I do too. I'm a very slow,
Yay.
careful reader, and I can remember I'm getting older, so not so well anymore, but I could remember everything from the books that I read because I read so slowly, and I remember all the scenes and dialogue out of movies that I loved, and there's something about the way my brain works. But I'm glad to hear
No.
somebody else is slow.
And it shows, Joe, because when I read your prose, it sort of dictates that I slow down with it, and I think that's a wonderful quality, because it's like saying you cannot get the most out of this unless you are putting in 100% of your attention as a reader. And that's great. That is like the highest achievement for me. But yeah, so I do all those things very slowly. But at the same time, I think there's really no other way to do it. So I do
Yeah.
hope that the next book will be easier in some ways. But I keep hearing people tell me no way. It's almost like it's not going to.
Very similar.
So,
Well, in my case, a very similar struggle. But the first book is different because it dates from your very first decision to become a writer and to honor yourself in some way as a writer and to get serious about it and to work on it. And you have worked on this book, and you've been to writers' workshops, and you've taken advice from people, and it that is not why it's such a good debut. It's a good debut because you're a good writer, but it shows how how putting all that time and effort into your first book is at some level also taking yourself seriously as a writer. And again, sorry to the book club people out there, we're getting writerly here, but it is
no,
a
I love
moment.
it.
They might love it, that's true, and they may be writers in their own right, but it's an important moment when you go, you know what, I think I'm going to do this. And then you have to, as you say, bear down and really do it. Well,
Thank you.
Now, I had a couple more questions. There are so many moments in the book where I've got a note here saying describing the indescribable. Have you ever heard that phrase? Writing about music is like dancing about architecture. Believe it or not, I looked this up, and perhaps someone out there can correct me on this, but as far as I can tell, the first person to say that was Martin Mull. And if you're my age, you'll recognize that name. If you're not, you won't. He's basically a comedian, but was very, very into music. And the way you describe music, and we've handled that, but honestly, readers out there, if you get this book, it will be kind of an incredible experience in terms of music. But it's also, you do so well talking about the ineffable and the connections between people, human connection. I can't overstate this. This is such a meditation on how people connect with each other and under what conditions and what difficulties there are with their connection. And there's also this fascinating seam that runs through the book, and I'm going to slaughter this word, I'm sorry. Is it?
Is it
It's-
缘分?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I should have written it down in big letters, but that the idea that, could you explain that? Because it is a beautiful, beautiful part of the book.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you. So this word comes from a section in the book called The Improviser's Guide to Untranslatable Words. And I'm glad that you're asking about the ineffable, because writing this book, also, dealing with music, dealing with the Cultural Revolution, for me, feels there's always this constant feeling of futility, like it's sort of like impossibility about it, that I can't possibly do it right. I can't possibly do it, and that's also the feeling I get when I try to translate things, and because I care about it, I often feel like the task feels monumental, and I'm minuscule compared to what the task can do. It demands, and so I kind of think about my task as a writer as an act of translation from the beginning, because in some ways I'm writing in English. Well, I'm writing in English about events, most of which took place in China and in Chinese. I mean, the dialogues were in Chinese. And so I am already doing this task that I feel somewhat impossible. And yet, I think, someone in your book said something like, if you're scared of doing something, you have to do it. So I feel like, if I think of it as an impossible task, then I have to do it. Because I've already thought of it as impossible. And so yuanfen, this yuanfen is one of the three untranslatable terms that I feature in that section, and as a way to introduce these terms, but also as a way to introduce the characters and events that are kind of refracted through those key words. And so yuanfen is one of these words that in Chinese means kind of like this sort of otherworldly connection, sort of immaterial set of coincidences and bonds that kind of tie people together, tie causes and effects together, or kind of reach across space and time to make sense of things that's not, like embodied in any kind of God or a sort of material, tangible force, but it's something that people talk about, in terms of their connection or misconnection, or sort of temporary connection or enduring connection. And so I really like that idea and the sort of the logic behind it. And so I just use it as a way to describe sets of events that we sometimes only make sense of retrospectively. And often that word yuanfen also gets used retrospectively, and I think that really simulates that our relationship to the past and the complexities of human relationships, and the differences between being a victim and being a perpetrator of violence, and for example, or
Wow.
being complicit in something, or just trying to explain an inexplicable attraction to someone or something. So,
Yes. And this happens in the book. And I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that there's a child at a fair. And when the child's brother turns his back, a full-grown man takes the child, scoops the child up and walks away. And it's a fair, so there's noise and there's fun and there's candied hawthorns, and he buys the child a candied hawthorn, and the reader is more or less dying over this. And it turns out that he's responding to a harmonization or a connection that he feels with the child to someone who has died and is not with him anymore. And his motives are no more horrible than to spend a little more time with that person. And there are other characters in the book who also experience this strange yearning kind of harmonization. And again, this sort of goes back to the fact that music vibrates through your body and, you know, speaks to multiple people at the same time. And this is just such a fascinating part of the book. And at some level, to me anyway, while I was reading, it felt like this armature, this indescribable armature that was holding all these people together and holding the story together. And it was a fascinating concept. A whole chapter of my family is actually Buddhist. And so I learned as a young person about, you know, multiple lives and reincarnation and, you know, the sort of harmonization and the habits are hard to break. So you were together in a previous life, you may be together in another life and things like that, and that you're drawn to each other. And so I found that element of the book absolutely, what's the word? It was just so affecting and so emotional.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for explaining that people talk about it in daily terms as well. So.
And you know what you said about Buddhism also makes me think about you know, another reason that I'm fascinated with that term and that concept is I'm interested because I grew up without religion, and you know, I'm still not religious, but I sometimes see and feel myself this need to create this ad hoc architecture of belief that may be cobbled together, that isn't part of any organized religion, that will allow us to explain you know, these kinds of complex, ineffable things that tie us to other people, to other generations, for the living and the dead. And I'm fascinated with by how that could be done on an individual basis. You know, you might take, you know, something like that's kind of like a more in the vocabulary of everyday life, like Feng. You might connect it with Buddhism. If you know, if you have familiarity with that, you might connect it with Taoism. I make references to Taoism in the book because that's also something that fascinates me, just because I read about it, but then I also see it in everyday life, in how people really assimilate aspects of Taoist, you know, vocabulary, you know,
Without even knowing,
consciously or unconsciously. And it's a beautiful process, I think, of us trying to understand, as humans, trying to understand what makes us tick and why bad things happen to us, and how we might move forward. And you know, and that I could go on and on. I can, you know, there's just so many variations on that. And yeah, so it's really interesting to learn about the Buddhist connection in your family
way of
too.
thinking. Well, for anyone who wants to see a kind of an embodiment of what Linda has been talking about, read the book, because you will internalize it as you're reading. You'll understand it emotionally and at a sort of a gut level. Again, it was just so so. Oh, I should also tell you, anyone who wants to participate in the Q&A, we're getting close to the time when we should open it up to you folks, for anybody who might have questions for Linda about the writing process, about China, about her research, what she's doing next, you know, what her next plans are, and things like that. Don't be afraid. You just go down to the bottom there and you can see a Q&A, a button. If you hover your mouse down there, you can see the Q&A. And just write your question in there, and we'll do our best to sort of fit it in. Let me see. I have one last question. I'm going to get a bit papery here. Yes. In terms of, you mentioned translation, you are at least bilingual. This is probably, and we talked about ineffable, the untranslatable. When you were writing this book, was there anything that you realized you absolutely could not explain to an English Western audience? And I don't know how you would explain it right now, but was there anything, was there a concept which we will not understand that, you went, I can't do it?
Well, I mean, I guess the hubris on my part was that I was going to try regardless. And I see that, people have asked me, like, had you thought about writing this in Chinese? Or, who did you write this to? Or who was your imagined audience? And I guess, a lot of this is trying to make sense of incoherent urges on my part dating from 10 years ago. But if I had to kind of retrospectively make sense of that, I would say I did imagine an ideal reader who is a combination of two very good friends, one of whom is bilingual, has very similar life experiences as me, and one of whom is actually Canadian. And so I think that shaped how I, my resolve to try to tell the story for someone who is like some kind of chimerical creature who's both, who embodies both of my friends. And I wanted very much to make sense, to make this book make sense to those who are not, Chinese, who don't speak Chinese, or who did not live in one of the, my fundamental philosophies about writing is that I want to go outside of myself, and I want to write about things that didn't, not necessarily from my own experience. And so I want this book to reach people who lived a very different life, who was born in Canada and grew up in Toronto. And it's my dream that this would reach them, and they would be moved and fascinated by what happens to my characters.
Well, they will be, and it certainly happened to me. I kept, I would get up in the morning and go, oh, I've got that book. Find out what happens next, and I think it really worked and it is a very good desire to get out of yourself. And I think this also will be the case for readers. We all really need to get out of we've been locked up in a house for a long time and not able to travel and stuck inside our own brains for a long time. And this book is really, again, it's very good for book clubs because it really does take you out of yourself. It's very affecting. It's very emotionally affecting. And yet it's unbelievably readable and unbelievably emotionally, and just, I don't know what the word is, just very yummy. So, so let me see. We got some questions here. Let me see if I can do this with my mouse. Let's see the Q&A. Let's see. Somebody said, how would this book have been different if you'd written it in Mandarin, and then said, wait, she's semi-answering this now. How do you keep going when it feels, this is Julia Cottrell. How do you keep going when it feels like writing is stuck, work is too overbearing, or life is sinking you? How do you keep up the belief and the practice?
Well, actually, Jill, I would love to hear your response too. Would you like to go first?
You won't like it. I chuck it in the corner and I become a hedonist. I play games and I pretend that I'm not a writer, and I'm the kind of writer who I wasn't all about the career. I write for the sheer joy of it, and when it ceases to be a joy, I wait until that comes back. And the other thing is, and I think this hopefully is the case for you too, I'll turn to books that really work for me and really inspire me and that I can learn from. Writers really do read in a slightly different way from readers. We're reading for the nuts and bolts, and we're reading to not steal exactly, but learn, from someone else's choices and what they do really well, and you wish you could do it well too.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I mean, I guess I'm still figuring out that answer myself because I've only had one book that I was stuck on so far. So but I love walking when I'm stuck, because somehow when my limbs are in motion, I feel like I feel less incompetent cerebrally, and somehow and I have, I feel like I can think better, even if I have to think, and I can talk to myself when I'm walking and I can, only a few people will see me, and
And with a mask, you can talk to yourself like, no, there's no tomorrow. I'm just
that's right.
a big old conversation with myself.
I hadn't thought about that. I'll just wear a mask next time.
Yeah.
And I think, and also what you said about reading, the only thing I'll add is that, something I already mentioned earlier, like when I was reading your book, it's not the content that was inspiring me, but your language, your wonderful, beautiful, and precise language put me in a frame of mind where a part of me is reading your book, and then a part of me is also thinking about writing, and without losing, the thread of what so I'm not, I'm really reading your book too. But then I can see that little part of me that's kind of, it's like, your prose had set up some kind of resonant kind of problem solving ability in my mind, that if I were stuck on something, I can see that reading your prose would help me get closer to solving that problem, even though it's not exactly like stealing or seeing something that you've done in your book. Is just the kind of background music that you generated in me that allows me to kind of think more expansively. And I think that's the great thing about reading good
I've
books.
I've heard people talk about that per se, but I've never heard anybody put it exactly that way. But that's exactly what I do as well. That there's an element of reading somebody whose prose, I tend to like stuff with a lot of style in it, makes me go, oh, you can do that. Oh, you can do that. But of course you're reading the story and enjoying the story at the same time. But it's a great compliment to somebody to think that your prose in some way set off things in their writing brain that was useful. What a nice thing to hear. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. We have some questions. Philip Wilson asks, what was the reason you chose to have a main character with a significant and unusual disability? Junie, I should say, at the very outset of the book, we see Junie and Cassia on the train, and people are looking at Junie because there's her legs end just below her knee, and she has no feet. And it is kind of incredible what you do with that and what her life is like.
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you to Philip for raising that. I really wanted to, at the heart of the story with Junie is this idea of leaving or staying, and this kind of sense of mobility, this sense of, where do you sort of how can you find wholeness in a, at home or very far from home. And so when I was writing her story, when I was started with her character, I had this very early inkling that I wanted her to wrestle with that, and I want her family to wrestle with that, and I wanted to kind of push at the boundaries of childhood and parenthood and all of that a little bit with this irregularity in their lives, and seeing how each family member tries to deal with this, her not being able to walk for a great deal of the story. And then what happens when she finds a solution in that mobility. And I was, yeah, a series of kind of inklings in the beginning kind of set me on that course, and it felt like the right course. So
I think it was the right course, and it's fascinating the huge positivity of the men that are looking after her, and how Momo's sort of fierce support of her, that she's no different, and he, at one point he thinks, if it weren't for the rest of us, she would never know anything was missing. It's just such a beautiful thing. And the grandfather who makes things that make it easier for her to get around, and how how amazingly upbeat and tough this little kid is. She's such a strong little person. So yeah, it's a good question to have Junie in this, the way she is in this book. We have probably time for, let me see. This is more of a writerly question, actually. Oh, I'm sorry. Philip, I did say your name. This is from Annette Bloom. Can you talk a bit about the relationship between style of writing and the contents? And I would, if I can add to this question, whenever you set out to write a book, you have to make decisions like, is it going to be first person? Is it going to be third person? Will it be past tense? Will it be present tense? And with each one of those choices, you are equipping yourself with things that will be useful, and you are making you are cutting certain things off from yourself. So first person can be very powerful and very punchy, and you're really in the person's life, but you can only know so much as the person knows, as the character knows at any given moment. Whereas third person, has this sort of godlike view. So your style, why did you choose the style that you did to write this story, and how did you make that choice in terms of the story you wanted to write?
yeah, that's a great question too. Thank you for asking that. I wanted, I've always envied stories that are omniscient. And part of me sometimes, I joke with my friends, what's the point of being a writer if you can't like practice omniscience? And that's what I love. I love some versions of the omniscient point of view. And of course, I couldn't quite pull off an full-on omniscient narrative in this regard. So I'm talking mainly about the POV choices here. So I did what I thought was the next best thing, which was the rotating third person point of view with different characters. And I had to kind of rein myself in and not kind of like go into too many characters, so that the thing was manageable. But I really love that form of storytelling where you can tell a single event from three different point of view characters and
Yes.
reveal something different. It's almost like parallax, I guess, with two things that you cannot get the same the single point of view, and it could be a little disorienting at times. That's the drawback, and sometimes I lose my own thread of the timeline and who has revealed what detail at what point. But I love that kind of fullness and that kind of gesture toward a plenitude of knowing and of experiences. and people being wrong, people not understanding or being mystified about a character and thinking someone has made a wrong decision, and then reevaluate that. And I think we also think about our own lives that way. We constantly reevaluate our own decisions in our past, and I want to simulate that with my storytelling. So that's what I decided to do. So
It's absolutely brilliant. And while you were talking about it, I was trying to remember the name of the Japanese film where the same story is told by multiple multiple characters, including the one who's dead.
right.
And then is it As I Lay Dying by
Yes,
Faulkner?
yes.
He bops around from character to character. It's multiple first person, I think, and then all of a sudden the dead person starts talking too, and it's just this is how you learn. This is how you learn what the family is like. And in the what is the name of the Japanese film? Can anyone remember?
Rashomon.
Rashomon.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's I love that. I love that so much. So, you know, you see, we have our influences, you know, and any third person narrative obviously has a personality, and the personality in this book is absolutely wonderful. I hope this isn't backwards. It's backwards to me.
Oh no, it's perfect.
I
Thank
hope
you,
you pick it
Jill.
up and read it. And we're gonna go to Daphne now. And thank you so much, Linda, for talking to me. It's been fascinating.
Thank you, Jill. It's been an honor.
It's been my honor to listen to both of you. Thank you so much, Jill. Thank you so much, Linda, for the depth of the conversation. I really enjoyed it. And thank you all for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed hearing from these two magnificent women. And if you know anybody who missed it and does want to see it, it will be available on our YouTube channel later this week. And please join us on June 6th to hear Megan Gale Cole's interview Aimee Wall, author of We Jane, which was longlisted for the 2021 Scotiabank Giller Prize. If you subscribe to our mailing list, you will be sent a registration notification. If not, just visit our website for more information. And thank you so much, and good night.